Welcome to Healthcare Logic for Growth, the weekly show where we talk life sciences and healthcare in general, things like clinical operations, research, commercial strategy, market analytics, and what it takes for anyone in healthcare to grow in a sustainable way. I'm Eric Marr, your host, the founder of Life Science Logic and a current Life Science Association board member. So whether you're building a biotech, running a rural hospital, leading a home health agency, or shaping healthcare policy, this show is for you. Hi all. Today's episode is part of our ongoing series regarding pharma, biotech, digital health, hospitals, startups, and life sciences with the general insights that impact the remainder of 2026 and possibly going forward. Today's title, Price to Win: How Small Life Science Companies Turn the MFN Drug Pricing Disruption into a Commercial Advantage. You've probably seen the headlines: Most Favored Nation drug pricing, pharmaceutical tariffs, mandatory price cuts, big pharma is under pressure. And if you're running a small life science company, say a biotech startup or an early stage pharma firm, there's a good chance you read those headlines and thought, that's not my problem yet. Those are big company problems. We'll deal with it when we get there. Here's what I want to tell you today. It's possible that might be the wrong read. And the cost of that read is, if you carry it through your current planning cycle, could show up in your commercial model at the worst possible moment. But here's the other thing I want to share with you. And this is the part most people miss, actually. The MFN pricing environment, handled correctly, is not just a risk to manage. For small life science companies that understand what's actually happening and position early, it can be a genuine commercial opportunity. The companies that will be in the best position 12 months from now are not the ones that avoided the MFN conversation. They are the ones that ran toward it with clarity and a strategy. This week, with Bio International opening in San Diego, the tariff clock running for smaller manufacturers, and the MFN network quietly shifting from voluntary to mandatory is the right week to have this conversation. So let's go. First off, before we get into anything, and to determine where this is going to head, you can kind of probably read the room, but we want to make sure that we have a shared definition. So what is MFN pricing and why does it matter? Because MFN pricing is one of those terms that gets thrown around constantly in headlines, and the actual meaning gets lost in the noise sometimes. Most Favored Nation pricing, MFN, is a drug pricing policy that says this: the United States will no longer pay more for a prescription drug than the lowest price that any comparable developed country pays for that same drug. That's it. Simple in concept, but as you might imagine, enormous in commercial consequence. And here's why it exists. The United States has historically paid dramatically more for branded drugs than any other country, often 2 to 4 times more than the same medication costs in like Canada, Germany, the UK, or Japan. The reason is structural. Other countries use government negotiating power to set prices. The U.S. has historically relied on market competition. So the result? American patients and taxpayers have effectively subsidized the cost of pharmaceutical innovation for the rest of the world. They've been paying premium prices while other countries paid a fraction of those prices. MFN pricing is designed to end that dynamic. Under an MFN framework, a drug would cost, let's just say, $50,000 per year in Germany and $150,000 per year in the U.S. The U.S. price gets benchmarked down towards the German price. The gap narrows. American prices come down. Foreign prices, theoretically, come up, as manufacturers can no longer use the U.S. market to subsidize lower prices elsewhere. For the pharmaceutical industry, MFN is not a nuance. It is a fundamental reset of the pricing architecture that has governed drug commercialization in the U.S. for decades. For a small life science company planning a launch, it means this: the price you set in your first X U.S. market may directly constrain the net price you can realize in your largest and most important market. That is a commercial strategy problem from day one, not from launch day. With that foundation in place, let's look at the MFN framework and how it stands right now, and why the timeline is moving faster than most small companies realize. The MFN framework, from voluntary to mandatory. Let me start with a quick summary of where things stand because this story has moved along and very quickly. The current state is different from where it was even 3 months ago. That's crazy. But in May 2025, the administration signed an executive order directing HHS to establish most favored nation price targets for branded drugs and biologics without generic or biosimilar competition, benchmarked to the lowest price available in any comparable developed country. The logic? American patients and taxpayers have been subsidizing the pharmaceutical innovation costs for the rest of the world. So, frankly, that ends now. And I've said it a few times because I want it to sink in. What followed was a period of bilateral negotiations between the administration and the largest drug manufacturers. As of today, 16 of the 17 largest pharmaceutical companies in the world have signed voluntary MFN agreements with this administration. These agreements share a common commercial architecture, Medicaid pricing at MFN benchmark levels, new launch pricing at MFN levels from day one, participation in the federal direct-to-consumer drug platform at negotiated cash pay discounts. But here's the shift that may have been missed. What began as a voluntary for the largest manufacturers is now moving toward mandatory for everyone else. Gibson Dunn's March analysis was pretty clear. It was explicit. Voluntary deals are giving way to mandatory rules. CMS has proposed to make MFN-linked pricing mandatory for Medicare through 2 formal rulemaking proceedings. And smaller and mid-sized biotechs, companies that were not among the original recipients of the demand letters sent to Big Pharma in July 2025, are now being told to expect that Globe and Guard, the mandatory Medicare pricing models, will apply to them as finalization approaches. Big news. The tariff clock, and why smaller manufacturers have a specific deadline. Later on top of the MFN framework is a second moving part that has received even less attention in the small company conversation, the Section 232 pharmaceutical tariffs. On April 2nd of this year, the current administration signed an order converting more than a year of tariff threats into binding trade law. The proclamation imposes a 100% ad valorem tariff on patented pharmaceutical products and their active pharmaceutical ingredients. For large companies, that tariff takes effect July 31st, just several weeks from now. For smaller manufacturers, the effective date is September 29th, just over, 13 weeks away. Those are not abstract policy dates. They are hard operational and financial deadlines. And here's the part of the story that should fundamentally change how small pharma and biotech companies think about the MFN conversation. The tariff rate is not flat. Companies that have signed MFN pricing agreements with HHS and have commerce-approved domestic manufacturing onshoring plans face a reduced tariff rate of 20%, not 100%. That is an 80 percentage point difference in tariff exposure tied directly to whether you have engaged the MFN framework proactively or not. Generic pharmaceuticals, biosimilars, and orphan drugs are currently exempt from the tariffs, a signal about where the policy pressure is concentrated and, for the companies in those categories, where a meaningful competitive window exists. Bio 2026, kind of the commercial context for this conversation, right? The Bio International Convention is in San Diego at the same time we're publishing this episode. More than 8,000 attendees, more than 550 global healthcare companies, the largest business development, partnering, and deal-making event in biotech. Breakout sessions this year focus on AI-enabled drug discovery, cell and gene therapy commercialization, and this year, more than ever, drug pricing strategy and market access. The reason bio matters as a news peg for this episode is not just that it's happening. It's that the conversations happening inside that convention center this week will be shaped entirely by the commercial environment I just described. Every business development conversation, every licensing negotiation, every partnership discussion, every investor meeting at Bio 2026 will have MFN pricing, tariff exposure, and the cost of delay as background variables. The companies that walk into those rooms with a clear-eyed understanding of this landscape will have better conversations than the ones that arrive hoping the topic doesn't come up. Now, of course, as always, I talk about some of the myths or misconceptions that happen as it relates to each episode. Here's the myth regarding this one, and I want to be direct about it because it is the most expensive planning error I see small life science companies making right now. The myth is this: MFN pricing is a big pharma problem. We're pre-revenue. We're in the clinical stage. We have time. That's the myth. But every part of that sentence, in my opinion, is wrong. Let me take them in order. First, MFN is not just a big pharma problem. The 16 voluntary agreements signed to date with the largest manufacturers, right? Those guys. But as Gibson Dunn noted in March, and as the formal rulemaking proceedings confirm, the mandatory framework is designed to apply broadly. The Globe and Guard models are not carve-outs for the top 17. They are proposals for Medicare-wide mandatory pricing that will apply to any company with a branded drug without generic or biosimilar competition. So if you are a small biotech with a novel therapeutic and you are planning a Medicare launch, you are in scope. Your size does not exempt you from the policy. It just means you received less advance notice. Second, being pre-revenue does not mean you're pre-impact. The companies that enter partnership negotiations, licensing discussions, or BD conversations at Bio this week without an MFN-aware commercial model are walking into those rooms at a bit of a disadvantage. A potential partner or acquiring modeling the value of your asset will apply an MFN haircut to their revenue projections, whether you've modeled it or not. If you haven't, they will, and your valuation will reflect that. Third, you do not have time. The September 29th tariff deadline for smaller manufacturers is just, 13 weeks away, 14 weeks away? If your supply chain has any international API sourcing component, which describes the vast majority of small pharma and biotech companies, and you do not have either an MFN agreement or an approved onshoring plan, you will face 100% tariffs on those materials in that time frame. This is not an abstraction. That is a cost of goods event. The companies that will win in this environment are not the ones that waited for clarity. They're the ones that built a commercial strategy designed for the environment as it exists today, not the environment they wish existed. So let's talk about a possible scenario. Small biotech company, phase 2 asset in a cardiometabolic indication, planning a 2028 commercial launch, currently preparing for a partnering meeting at Bio later on this week. Their question: how do we talk about pricing and market access in a BD conversation when we don't know what MFN is going to look like by the time we launch? The answer really starts with reframing the question. The goal is not to have perfect certainty about what MFN looks like in 2028. The goal is to demonstrate to a potential partner that your commercial team understands the pricing environment, has built scenarios around it, and has a strategy that is resilient across the board. That is not a weakness. That is commercial maturity. And a serious BD partner, whether they're a large pharma company or a strategic investor, will respect a founder who walks in with an MFN-aware financial model more than someone who says the pricing environment is too uncertain to model. Here's what that looks like. You build 3 pricing scenarios. The base case, MFN pricing applies at launch, meaning your U.S. net price is benchmarked to your lowest price in any comparable country. All right? The next scenario, the upside case. You have an outcomes-based or value-based contracting structure that justifies a premium over MFN benchmark through documented clinical differentiation. Number 3, the downside case, the third scenario. The full MFN price floor applies, and you model the revenue implications with and without a domestic manufacturing arrangement that reduces tariff exposure. When you walk into a partnering meeting at Bio with those 3 scenarios modeled, and when you can speak to the regulatory and supply chain strategy for each one, you are not presenting uncertainty. You are presenting strategic readiness, a good place to be. That is a completely different commercial conversation than the one most small companies are walking in with right now. So I always like to mention resources that should be open and you looking at periodically. Okay, so first, Skadden published a sharp analysis on June 1st, just a couple of weeks ago, titled MFN Drug Pricing and Impact on International Life Sciences Licensing Deals. It covers how MFN pricing interacts with existing license agreements, milestone payment structures, and most favored nation provisions in existing contracts. If you have any licensing agreement with MFP clauses, this piece is required reading before your next BD conversation. I always try to reference these kinds of things that are complex or can be complex. And Skadden is a great law firm. They've explained it very well. I'll also reference it in our show notes once this episode is done. Secondly, Gibson Dunn's Biotech Briefings published a piece in March entitled MFN Drug Pricing in 2026. Voluntary deals are giving way to mandatory rules. 5 things life sciences companies need to know. It is the clearest public analysis of how the Globe and Guard models work, what the commercial terms of the voluntary agreement share in common, and how mid-sized and smaller biotechs should be thinking about their exposure. 5 things. Make sure to read all 5. Third, Clinical Leader published a detailed breakdown in April of the Section 232 pharmaceutical tariff structure, including the tiered rate framework, the exemptions for generics and biosimilars and orphan drugs, and the onshoring plan pathway that reduces tariff exposure from 100% to 20%. I mean, from 100 to 20%. You ought to be making sure you read this, right, and fully understand it. If your company has any international API sourcing, this piece tells you exactly what your options are before the September 29th deadline. Again, all 3 are in the show notes. As part of an episode summary, these are 3 things to think about during Bio Week and beyond. Takeaway number 1, the MFN framework is no longer a big pharma story. The voluntary deals signed by the 16 largest manufacturers are the leading edge of a mandatory pricing regime that will apply broadly across the branded drug market. If your company has a branded asset at a stage of development, the commercial model for that asset needs to account for MFN pricing now, not at launch. Takeaway 2. The tariff deadline for smaller manufacturers is September 29th, and it is not hypothetical. A 100% tariff on patented pharmaceutical products and their APIs is a cost of goods event for any company with international supply chain exposure. The pathway to 20% instead of 100% runs through an MFN agreement and a commerce-approved onshoring plan. Both require lead time. 13, 14 weeks is not much of it, so jump on that as quickly as possible. Takeaway 3. The companies that handle this well will not handle it by waiting for certainty. They will handle it by building commercial models that are resilient across MFN scenarios, engaging the regulatory and policy processes available to them, and walking into conversations at Bio and beyond with the kind of pricing and market access fluency that signals commercial readiness to a partner or an investor. That fluency is a competitive advantage right now because most small companies, I don't know that they have it. So keep that in mind. As you know, we always try to close out our episodes with an actual go-forward strategy instead of just throwing you information and moving on. So if this episode is valuable to you and your team, here's a potential go-forward strategy. 5 actions for small life science companies navigating the MFN and tariff environment right now. 1, build your MFN pricing scenario model ASAP. You do not need perfect information to build a scenario model. You need 3 things. Your anticipated launch price in the US, your current or planned ex-US pricing in key reference markets, a realistic range of what MFN benchmark pricing would mean for your US net revenue. Model the base, upside, and downside cases. If you are going to bio, this model belongs in your BD deck, not as a risk slide, but as a demonstration of commercial maturity. Partners and investors are already applying an MFN haircut to your asset's value. Show them you've done the same and that you have a strategy around it. Number 2, audit your API supply chain for tariff exposure. Now, not in September. Pull your current active pharmaceutical ingredient sourcing data and identify which materials come from countries that would be subject to the Section 232 tariff. Then assess which of your products are patented and which fall into exempt categories, generics, biosimilars, orphan drugs. For any product in scope for the 100% tariff, model the cost of goods impact and evaluate whether a commerce-approved domestic manufacturing or onshoring arrangement is feasible, given the timeline. The deadline for smaller manufacturers is September 29th. Start that process in September? No, it's too late. Starting it this week gives you a lot more runway, 13, 14 weeks. Number 3, explore outcomes-based and value-based contracting as your MFN strategy. The most effective commercial tool available to small pharma and biotech companies in an MFN environment is not a legal exemption or a lobbying strategy. It is clinical differentiation expressed through an outcomes-based contracting model. MFN benchmarks a price to what comparable countries pay for a drug. What it does not benchmark is what a payer pays for documented outcomes. Reduced hospitalizations, improved disease management, quality adjusted life years. So if your asset has clinical differentiation that generates measurable, reimbursable outcomes, building a value-based contracting structure into your launch model creates a premium over MFN pricing that is grounded in evidence rather than negotiating leverage. This is where small companies with strong clinical data have an advantage that larger companies with legacy pricing structures cannot easily replicate. Keep that in mind. 4, if you're attending Bio this week, walk in with pricing and market access that makes sense. It's your narrative, right? Business development conversations about 2026 will not avoid the MFN topic. Every sophisticated partner invested in those rooms have already modeled its implications. The founders who come prepared to discuss their MFN-aware commercial strategy, who can speak fluently about their pricing scenarios, their payer strategy, and how their assets' clinical differentiating supports a premium over the MFN floor, will have better conversations than ones who treat pricing as a topic for a later stage. If you do not have that narrative built, The few days you're there are your window to build it. I know that's rapid fire, but try your best. Try your very best. Number 5, for biosimilar, generic, and orphan drug companies, treat the current environment as a market access window, not a threat. Make it a positive. The Section 232 tariff exemptions for generics, biosimilars, and orphan drugs are not an accident. They reflect a deliberate policy choice to incentivize exactly the kind of products that reduce branded drug costs. If you are in any of those categories, the MFN and tariff environment is actively favorable to your competitive position relative to branded competitors. That's a new one, right? Your payer conversations, your formulary positioning, and your market access strategy should all be incorporating this dynamic explicitly. In an environment where branded drug pricing is under sustained pressure from multiple directions simultaneously, the relative value of a biosimilar alternative or an orphan drug with an exclusivity period is higher than it was 18 months ago. Position it accordingly. So I know we had a lot of info, and I try to keep it short, but I hope I didn't go too quickly. But that's your go-forward strategy, but only if it makes sense to you. These are opinions. The drug pricing reset happening right now in the United States is one of the most significant commercial environment changes in the pharmaceutical industry in a generation. The companies that treat it as a threat to monitor will be reactive. The companies that treat it as a commercial design problem, one that requires updated models, proactive supply chain, decisions that are tied to that supply chain, and a differentiated value narrative, will be positioned to kind of compete on their own terms. And that's unique when you're competing against the big guys. So if you're participating in Bio in San Diego this week, I hope this episode gives you something useful to bring into those conversations. And if you want to build MFN-aware commercial strategy for your company, that's exactly what we do. Visit us at lifesciencelogic.com and send me a note. Share this episode with a founder who's attending Bio. The commercial landscape they walk into in San Diego this week looks different than it did 6 months ago. And it helps to know that going in. We'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks for spending time with me today on Healthcare Logic for Growth. If this episode brought you value, share it with someone in your network who's navigating their own commercial journey. I think they'll appreciate it. And if you have a healthcare-related topic you want me to tackle, leave me a note at eric@lifesciencelogic.com. Thanks again. I hope you'll join me on the next episode.